What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 120 of the Noizze Podcast, part of the Noizze Podcast Network, brought to you by Noizze.co.uk and sponsored by Stereo Brain Records. I am your host, / your boy, Chris Pugh, and as ever, and unfortunately not in visual form, I'm joined by my very good friend and Mr. Cynical himself, Samuel Lewis. Sam, we just recorded a review of Periphery's new album, P5, Gent is Not a Genre, which is going to come out after this review that we're currently doing now, funnily enough. And for some reason, it still feels really weird that I'm not seeing your face respond. I'm not sure how much I like it. We're going to have to sort this camera out within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably going to be good for this review now, so you don't see the sort of associated vitriol, that sort of the flecks of spit flowing from my face, flared nostrils, flushed cheeks, all that type of stuff. And when we'll start reviewing other albums that don't make me want to commit various crimes, that's going to be probably more positive to be able to see my face then. So we'll sort it out, though. I reckon it's a very simple case of me doing something moronic with my computer, and the moment that I just reverse that, we should be sound.
But yeah, if you're new here, it's a rare camera fault on Sam's end. I'm not so egotistical to only have the camera on me and not give it to someone. No, they should only look at me, not you. I am nowhere near that egotistical. We're a rock and metal podcast. We usually come to you at least once every fortnight discussing an album that we find particularly interesting. As you will notice on today's title of the episode, we're talking about Suicide Silence's new record, Remember You Must Die. The best way to support us is by liking / subscribing, depending on whichever service that you use. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Basically, anywhere you get your podcasts, me and Sam will be there. You can follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast, or you can follow the general Noizze handle at Noizze UK. Sam, let's get straight into this record. Remember You Must Die is out on March 10th via Century Media Records. It's a Californian deathcore legend's 7th studio album and the follow-up to 2020's Become the Hunter. We saw Suicide Silence, Sam, co-headline with After the Burial a couple of months ago. Was it, I want to say 4 months ago, but I think it was around about November time. Yeah. Great evening to be had. Me and you both said about Suicide Silence that regardless of whether you're into them or not, Eddie Hamida is quite an impressive vocalist to see live. Effortless, almost to the same extent of CJ McMahon from The Artist Murder. Just effortless performance of the trials and tribulations that it would be to be a deathcore vocalist. Did having seen them live create any further anticipation or interest in you going into this album? Because I know you've never really been massive on Suicide Silence to begin with, but did seeing them live create any further interest for you?
Yeah, because it reminded me that they are an incredibly popular deathcore band, which is really usually a juxtaposition in itself, to say popular and deathcore together. But they reminded me that the pull of that kind of music, when done well and written well, can be incredibly impactful and can be incredibly impressive as an agent of live performance. And it was a reminder of that, and a reminder that really the Suicide Silence are now long-time veterans of this genre.
I'm not going to take the mick out of our audience and kind of talk at length about their self-titled album they released in 2015. It's been spoken about at insane lengths for Lord knows how long. One thing I did just want to mention is I do find Suicide Silence's history quite particularly fascinating because they're comfortably one of the most important extreme metal bands of the 21st century. I listened to The Cleansing again today. It's just literally like game changers, ridiculously good deathcore album that is. And obviously that came out in 2008, I think. So a huge game-changing band, and obviously that was with Mitch Lucker at the forefront. But I can't help but be curious as to what would have happened had that self-titled album they released in 2014 been better received, because it wasn't a good album, and I wasn't a massive fan of the album at all. I remember reviewing it I forgot the site I reviewed it for now, but I was less than pleased with it, and I remember You Can't Stop Me being brilliant and thinking, oh my god, Suicide Silence are right on the edge of something huge here, and it seemed like they kind of just crunched that up and threw it in a trash can and did something completely different, which I don't think worked. I am just curious what would have happened had that album been better received, because I feel like Suicide Silence were forced to go back to their roots, which is kind of what Become the Hunter was, but it's absolutely what Remember You Must Die is. Remember You Must Die is absolutely Suicide Silence going back to, or attempting to go back to, that the Cleansing and the Black Crown era. Sam, we've spoken about this anecdotally and in little fragments, and I'm fairly aware of your opinion already going into this album. Before you start talking about it, do you feel that there's any chance of Suicide Silence being stuck in between a rock and a hard place, where they tried the expansion, they tried to do something different, it was very negatively received, they were almost forced really to go back to previous deathcore tropes? I'm not sure whether, you know, I'd love to know from the band whether they went back willingly to previous tropes, or they did feel forced and like, right, we can't do the thing that we thought might be cool, so we've got to do this thing. Do you feel like at the very least the band are routine the rock and a hard place, where it's like, hey, we tried to do the new thing and they said no, so I guess we've got to do the old thing?
Yeah, I can understand that from a sympathetic standpoint, that they are almost now required to try and replicate what made them successful 15 years ago now, which is weird to say. That made them so impactful at that time. And I was incredibly critical of that 2015 record because it was dreadful.
I mean, it wasn't very good, no. It wasn't
Yeah,
very good.
yeah. It was, but so I don't want this to be like, well, pick your poison. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to just repeat the same thing and criticize them for that? Or do you want to do the new thing and criticize them for that as well? So I could understand that from a standpoint of putting a band in a space of difficulty. However, if this is going back to strengths, and I expect it to sound like a strength, Kris. If this is what you're supposed to be good at, then it needs to be better than this. This sounds like fine. We'll do that then as an album, because the thing is now is you talk about game changers. 15 years is a long time in metal.
It is.
And what is game changing in 2008 absolutely isn't in 2023. We got away just early today. We got away from an album review where, if Periphery released P5 in 2008, I'm not really sure what anybody would have been able to do about it.
Yeah.
From a reviewing standpoint, just simply because every year it seems that things move forward. Kris, this isn't very good, man. This is like if deathcore bands wrote wrestling themes. This is like bass simplicity. This is like, man, I don't want to go on a big, massive tirade, because I don't actually think the album's actually worth my anger in that sense. But it's the real element that I have to me is Kris, mate, it sounds tired. It sounds like they've just tried to do deathcore by numbers. It sounds like when you get a year 11 in your class, and we're both English teachers, to try and incorporate gothic tropes in a horror story. So the kid writes things like, and then the man bled from his face and it was very scary. And it's like, see, Sarah, I had the blood in, like you said. And it feels like they've just done that for metal fans. It's like, what do metal fans like? They like it with when riffs are really simple, and like big drum beats. They like it when I shout a bit. So we're gonna have a bit of that. It just feels like a weird, almost like a parody. This is what people who don't like metal think metal sounds like all the time. And this is what they mock us for, because it's just grunting and riffs, and the riffs are really, really dull. And the songs don't move along, and there's no complex ideas. There's no wider theme. And it's just like, two blokes sitting on a park bench, and one turning to another and be like, it's really bad, bro. He's like, what is it, bro? He's like, the world's really bad, bro. He's like, bro, you should write that down. Oh, you know what else is really bad, bro? What? Death's really bad in it, bro. Yeah, death's scary. Let's write that down as well. And it's just like 15 songs about like just the most stereotypical dirge that you would see in shit metal. And that's what it is. It's like, The world's really scary. Let's say that out loud and then scream it again in a slightly different pitch. And then we'll repeat that same riff from earlier and hope that nobody notices. But this time we'll put a different effect on the guitar. And then we'll do the same thing for the next track and the same thing and the same thing and the same thing after that. Like, it's just it's metal by numbers. And it just feels like a band that are just like, oh, let's just put an album out so we can tour and play 3 songs off it. It's really uninspiring. And like I say, I was initially gonna go on this like, this is really terrible, but really, metal's moved on from Suicide Silence in the sense that we're not sitting here being like waiting on bated breath for what Suicide Silence done. And their albums are going to define the industry. Even their imitation of this type of metal has been bettered several times over this year and in the years that have followed their initial output. It's not great. It's incredibly disappointing. And honestly, like, I listened to it once. I didn't have to listen to it again. Third song in, I could have told you what the rest of it sounded like. I mean, just for the listener who hasn't got the album yet, Remember You Must Die is actually a 2-part song because obviously the message didn't need to sink in just the once. But songs like Capable of Violence, Fucked for Life, Kill Forever, God Be Damned. It's like they're all songs that are like taken from like the pages of like the 15-year-old's maths book, and they're just scrawled at the back and things they'd write on their own wrist, or what somebody thinks metal should sound like because he saw somebody with like a bracelet with spikes on, and that's what metal sounds like. It's just the most stereotypically like just generic metal stuff. It's almost like a metal band was written by AI or ChatGPT has written a metal album and they're like, this is what metal's like, right? And it's just aping all of these tropes and stereotypes. And that was me not ranting about it, Chris, so I'll leave that there.
Well, there's parts of me that understands your viewpoint.
Okay.
But on the other hand, okay, so if I said to you,
sure.
right, who are the big hitters in deathcore at the minute? Lorna Shore, Brand of Sacrifice.
Yep.
Are the 2 that I immediately think of that are pushing deathcore forward at the moment. But those bands use a lot of synth and electronica. Sam, you're not telling me that you want Suicide Silence to use synth and electronica, are you?
Only because you know they can't.
Well, no, but I'm not sure it's about the idea of they can't, Sam. I think it's more so the idea of really Suicide Silence is one of the few bands left in the space who sound like a late 2000s, early 2010s early 2010s deathcore band, and there is still a clamoring for that because Whitechapel have gone to a more broad sound. The Artist Murder are probably closer to a death metal band in these from the last 2 albums, and obviously bands like Lorna Shore, Brand of Sacrifice, they're going down the kind of synth like, and I love those 2 bands by the way, but symphonic electronic route, sort of to prevail a kind of like a band in and of themselves. Mental Cruelty, they're also going down now the electronica symphonic side. I'm not really sure where Suicide Silence could have gone here, apart from the fact of being like, well, we know that we've got an audience that still clamours for and loves that late 2000s, early 2010s deathcore. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to give you 12 songs of it. And I don't think by any stretch of the imagination this is a bad deathcore album. I think this is a predictable deathcore album. But for me here, there was, as a huge fan of deathcore, there was still lots to enjoy. I'm not going to be listening to this album again in 6 months' time and still talking about it because, as you've mentioned, it is somewhat forgettable. But the song, particularly that I thought of in terms of, you know what, Suicide Silence are filling the gap here, is Effed for Life, because it's got that slow, hard punch of a guitar that kind of bursts out the gate, and it fills that void of, there's not an incredible amount of technicality there. It's just unlet bloodletting, or kind of unleashed bloodletting, I should say. And Eddie Hamida, he has got he has got an intensely powerful voice. I mean, I really liked him in All Shall Perish, and I don't think I've ever heard Eddie Hamida do a vocal record, with the exception of Suicide Silence, is self-titled, that I haven't enjoyed his vocals on. The final song, Full Void, is the one song on the album that does go for something a little bit different because it's got that kind of mellow, slow picked guitar to open. There's a really nice double time rhythm riff that gets propped up by like a really nice little lead run by Mark Halem. There's a nice bit of quote unquote for deathcore melody. And Full Void is by far the most interesting moment on the album. There's an extended instrumental that works quite well, and you're constantly waiting for Eddie to burst back in. It kind of builds up that anticipation. I think that Full Void, for those that are listening, they're thinking maybe they'll do at least something different. You should head straight to Full Void. Full Void is quite an interesting 3 or 4 minutes. The rest of it, Sam, I do see what you're saying. The album does kind of blend into one huge blast beat rhythm mixed up with guitars and violence, but that was what late 2000s, late 2010s deathcore was, Sam. Like if you go back and listen to the early Whitechapel albums, they sound a lot like this. So I'm not sure whether you've just completely moved on from the late 2000s deathcore, whether actually you never really liked it that much anyway, with the exception of The Art Is Murder. Maybe the latter is more accurate, possibly. Obviously, you can tell me what you like more than I can tell you. But I think this very much fits into late 2000s, early 2010s deathcore. So if you don't like this, maybe you're less of a fan of that than I thought you were.
Possibly. I think it's just a cheap imitation of that, though. Like I understand what you were saying earlier when you talked about this is where the deathcore landscape is. I refuse to believe there's a need that's actually been satisfied by this record to the level that if you need a deathcore record that you'd be listening to this and like, yeah, that's cool. That's good enough for me. I think there are better offerings for this type of music now, even in this style. Because even I'm not saying that I need to listen to deathcore and I'm like criticizing it for not being prog. That's not what I'm doing. I just think that even in the annals of what good deathcore is, I don't think it fits that either. I think it just imitates what the band thinks its fans want right now, and it sounds like the album was written in about an hour and a half. It just sounds so overtly simplistic. And at least before, when you had late 2010s, early late 2008 9s, if that late aughts, early 2010s, that's the right moniker for it, I think. They actually sounded like the ingenuity and the aggression was really, really there. And I'm not saying that I was expecting it to be sort of complicated and massively filled with transgressions and all this type of stuff. I'm not looking for that. If you want to go for simple and hard, then cool. Let's go for simple and hard. But I don't think it's good at that either. I think it's dull, Chris. And I think that there isn't like when I was talking about melody, there isn't like a hook or a really great breakdown here that makes me sort of change my viewpoint at all. And I think that if we're lowering the standard to find things to compromise and find things to promote, where we say things like this is interesting or phrases like this is slightly different, then that kind of answers the question here that this was outdated the moment they produced it, and it kind of feels like just an imitation of what has happened before and doesn't feel like a particularly good one. I think it's I don't know, man. Like you could push me to say, all right, is it a solid deathcore record? Fine. I just think that there are deathcore bands now that are doing better versions of this because it feels like, at least with those bands, that it's genuine and raw and energetic. I don't really feel like that here. The decisions that they make are like identical almost every time in these songs. The blueprint is identical. And even the tempos they choose are identical. They have that kind of 16th note kind of rhythm, and then they break it up with like a breakdown that's simplistic, and then there's like a drive-in kind of 4 to the floor style one that gets in every so often, and that's kind of like the 3 gears that this album seems to have, with occasional clean guitar, and then we'll pause for a guttural, and it sort of kicks back in again. It just maybe you're right. Maybe I'm looking at this and I'm seeing it as overly simplistic, and that's like a criticism. But if you're a metal fan of a certain disposition, then that's exactly what you want. In the same way that me and you aren't massive doom metal fans, but there are people that really like doom metal, and they're like, bro, I'm not listening to a doom record looking for like complexity. I enjoy that it's heavy and dark and swings its weight around. That's fine. That's fine. I just think that even within the ramifications and barriers and boundaries of its own genre, it's bad at that. Like, I don't think it's a good. If you're like, I needed like 2000s, early 2010s vibe metal, deathcore record, I think there are other albums that would do a better job than this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious as to if we had a parallel universe, what your thoughts on this would be if it came out in 2015. If this followed You Can't Stop Me, and the Lorna Shore brand of sacrifice movement of deathcore hadn't happened yet. But obviously that's completely fictitious. And he said we should focus on the here and now. The truth is, Sam, that this album continuously tries to sell you the same pony. But I find the various means they go about in terms of the salesmanship of the pony, I think it's still fun to hear for me. I don't think this is a great album. I think this is good. I like it. It's not an album that I'm gonna listen to on a regular basis. I think that Suicide Silence were put in a position, and we were speaking at the start of the podcast, they're put in a position where they couldn't stick where they were, so they had to go backwards. And back is 2008 to 2012. And this is not better than The Cleansing. It's not as good as The Black Crown. It's not as good as You Can't Stop Me. So I'm not saying it's up there with either of those three records. You Can't Stop Me is a brilliant record. It was a great introduction for Eddie. This album isn't as good. It does sound a little bit tired. It's predictable.
All right.
But for me, I Silence fans, I feel like this isn't going to be the kind of album where they get criticised by their fan base. I think this is going to be an album that will be pretty well received, not massively, but pretty well received.
All right, so I'll allow me to pull hairs, and I'm just generally, I don't want to get into like actually that's like a death metal, like just allow me to generally. Let's look at bands in their ilk, releases. Let's just ask you. Would you take this Suicide Silence album over the last X album? I'm going to put the band in the X, okay?
Right.
Like, not always exact contemporaries. I'm not asking about Bring Me or anything like that, but I'm just trying to fit in the general role. Okay. Is this better than the last Carnifex record?
I think it's probably as good as. I'm not a massive Carnifex fan. I think it's probably as good as.
Better than the last Shadow of Intent record?
No.
Better than the last Slaughter to Prevail record?
No.
Better than the last Despised Icon record?
Yeah, I think Despised Icon suck, man. I don't like Despised Icon.
Fit for an Autopsy?
No, Fit for an Autopsy are a fantastic deathcore band.
Born of Osiris, their last album was really good.
I would take Born of Osiris over this.
And then after that, we're getting into like, bands that are very clearly different genres. But like, even
I'd also if you think about Cognitive and Osai, I'd also take those over this as well.
Even among contemporaries of bands that have released, this isn't the argument against longevity, because Cannibal, again, if you want to go death metal and widen it a little bit, Cannibal Corpse, great. Loads of other veteran bands that we've reviewed recently. In Flames, fucking hell. In Flames have been around for 30 years, nearly. Their last record was really good. At least it sounded like they actually liked the music they were writing and playing. I don't think that's the case for this one. And then after that, we're getting into bands that I would just be asking you opinions on that I haven't really heard. But generally speaking, it's not great in comparison to what modern metal's doing right now. It's not great in comparison to some of its peers. What are we doing here?
I feel like it's an album that fills a position in the deathcore marketplace,
and that's the compliment you're giving it. It's the auxiliary right back of the deathcore scene.
but the thing is, Suicide Silence, I mean, they are they are kind of a legendary outfit in deathcore. I know that is kind of I know deathcore is almost in compared to the ocean that is alternative music. Deathcore is a pond. Deathcore is a pond, but within that pond, Suicide Silence are the whales, kind of taking up 90% of that water space. My metaphors here. Suicide Silence are the whales taking up 90% of that water space. They are
whales in ponds. Noizze 2023.
They are
just Brendan Fraser and Suicide Silence hanging out next to each other.
They're an integral part of the existence of deathcore, like they really are in terms of the growth of it. And of course, Eddie isn't Mitch Looker, so the cleansing was out of the question. I don't want to sit into the cleansing 2.0. Obviously, they wouldn't do that because that'd be kind of disrespectful to Mitch. And nor would I want to sit into the Black Crown 2.0 for the same reasons. I was kind of hoping for a You Can't Stop Me, which is a great deathcore album. And this is kind of, if You Can't Stop Me, we're going to give 100% to. This is 65% of You Can't Stop Me. This album is. Plenty of hard punching, gruesome riffs with gutturals from Eddie, some nice drum fills from the new drummer. What was his name? Ernie Iniguez. Some nice fills from him. Some really nice lead and rhythm guitar sections from Mark Halem and Chris Garza. This is just your pretty standard, decent deathcore album. I think you've gone in really, really hard on it because I'm the bigger of the deathcore fans out of the two of us, and I find this just fun to listen to because it's just absurdly over the top. And and that kind of illusion I made earlier, the way they try and sell the pony, I find it quite fun. And again, when we saw them live, we weren't blown away, but it was fun, and we were like, that's brutal, and like giving ourselves a stink face and that kind of stuff. So there's still a space for Suicide Silence, and at the very least, this album continues that space. And I suppose if you offered that to the band as they started writing and say, yeah, you know what, just give us something to continue the space, because we want people to turn up live, because that's where we make our money with the merch sales and stuff. And we know if we get them in the building, they'll have fun because they're a deathcore fan. Why wouldn't they have fun listening to us? One of the purveyors of deathcore.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I will say it's better than the last two Amura records.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's considerably better than anything you've ever done.
Yeah, that's fair too. There we go. You can put that on the front of the label.
Yeah, I don't think we've got any further to go here on this Suicide Silence album. If you are listening, thank you very much for doing so. If you're a Suicide Silence fan, Sam said sorry, but I think you will enjoy this.
I said no such thing.
To be crystal clear on my view, it's a good deathcore album and nothing more. This album will become quickly forgettable for me. Thank you very much for listening. A reminder, Remember You Must Die is out on March 10th via Century Media Records. The best way to support the Noizze podcast is by subscribing on YouTube or liking/following, depending on the other service that you are using. We will be back at the very least in a week or so's time. Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate it. Remember to follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast. We will see you soon. We love you. Bye.